As the sun set on the first day of the American Revolution, most of the American militiamen who fought the British on April 19, 1775, found themselves miles away from here, miles away from where the battle started, and even miles away from their homes. As all of the history books tell it, during the battles of Lexington and Concord, American local militia companies famously drove the British out of the countryside back to Boston down this very road. This is the Battle Road, which starts in Concord, Massachusetts, and is part of the MinuteMan National Historical Park. And it was here that American militia companies, firing from behind stone walls and trees, turned the British retreat from Concord into the famous running battle of April 19th, 1775. And that is usually where the story ends. But less talked about is what happened after the battle ended. Once the dust settled here on Battle Road, and the last of the battered and bloodied British troops retreated into Boston, and the militiamen found themselves around here. This is Prospect Hill, which would become one of the most strategic positions in all of the siege of Boston from 1775 to 1776. It's located in modern-day Somerville, Massachusetts, which in 1775 was Cambridge, and we're just outside Boston. And the British passed through here on the final leg of their grueling and bloody retreat. In their desperation to reach the safety of the Boston garrison, the British make a push into Charlestown and cross Charlestown Neck. Now, what sits at the top of Charlestown, right at Charlestown Neck, and if you watch this channel, you know it is Bunker Hill. Bunker Hill itself sits at Charlestown Neck. And so as the British retreat into Charlestown, they ascend Bunker Hill, where they stop and turn and form a line facing Charlestown Common, where the Americans are, so that the British will be in a very strong position if the Americans pursue them into Charlestown. But they don't. General William Heath of the Massachusetts militia is senior commanding officer on the field on April 19th, 1775. And at Charlestown Common, he orders the militia to halt and stop the pursuit, knowing that any further attempts to attack the British while they're in that strong position would be disastrous. The Battle of Lexington and Concord of April 19th, 1775 is over. The American militia's pursuit of the British has come to an end. And that, a lot of the time, is where the story ends too. But things weren't over for the men that were here. They didn't, as a group, just get up and leave or go home. They stayed right here. And this is what happened next. Hi everybody, it's me, Katie. Welcome back to my channel, where it is all Revolutionary War all the time. On this channel, we venture out on historical action adventures, and we visit the places where events of the American Revolution actually happened, like today here at Prospect Hill. If this sounds like fun to you, and if you're looking for really in-depth, non-AI historical content, then I hope you'll consider subscribing and coming along so you can join us on our next historical action adventure. General Heath places a guard here at Prospect Hill, and he sets out sentinels from here to Charlestown Neck, a distance of about 2 miles. Now that the British have retreated onto the Charlestown Peninsula for the night, there is only one way off, and that is across Charlestown Neck. So if the British make a move, the sentinels are going to know about it. He also forms patrols to cover this whole area during the overnight hours. And he orders the rest of the troops to lie on their arms in case of a possible attack, which the Americans expected at any moment. Night fell on April 19th. And unless the men had brought some provisions with them, maybe some bread or meat or cheese in their knapsacks, there was none. This would change. This would change within the next couple days. Provisions and rations would be distributed. But on April 19th, 1775, there were none. And there was nowhere to sleep for the men but on the ground, if they slept at all. On the morning of April 20th, the day immediately after the battle, General Heath sends out a burial detail in order to bury the men that fell along the route of the battle. And he also sends out men to reconnoiter the ground around Cambridge in order to establish more alarm posts. But he knows he needs to get food. Food for the thousands of American militiamen who are encamped in Cambridge. They need to eat. And so General Heath sends a request to the Provincial Congress to send the provisions to Cambridge that had been being stored in Concord. It's really well known that on the night of April 18th, 1775, the British marched out of Boston to Concord in order to seize military supplies, namely ammunition and artillery that were being stored. But what's less well known is that there were also some other kind of innocuous sounding supplies being hid there as well. Things like meat and flour and wooden bowls and wooden spoons. And wooden bowls and spoons sound really uninteresting until you think. It is very hard to effectively feed an army without them. The Provincial Congress were storing supplies like that in anticipation for this moment in order to feed an eventual army. The provisions that General Heath, I lost my balance here on this hill, on Prospect Hill. The provisions that General Heath requested will come. But in the meantime, other things were collected to feed the men. Things like local carcasses of beef and pork that had been prepared to be sold at market in Boston, but never made it there due to the outbreak of war. And also a supply of ship bread, which you might be more familiar with by the term of hardtack, that belonged to the British Royal Navy and was being stored at Roxbury, but was now out of British reach. Amongst the militia who drew provisions during those first few days after the battles of Lexington and Concord were Captain Aaron Haynes' company of Sudbury and Captain Joshua Walker's company of Woburn. And both of those companies participated in the battles of Lexington and Concord from some of its earliest moments. Hi everybody, I'm just breaking in really quick to say that if you're enjoying this video or if you've learned something new, I hope you'll consider clicking the like button, which tells YouTube that a viewer finds a video to be worthwhile. And also, if you think this video merits it, I hope you'll consider hyping this video. And people tell me that there is a hype button now on my channel, which YouTube has given to some small channels in an effort to give their audiences the opportunity to help the channel grow. So by clicking the hype button, you're telling YouTube directly that you really enjoy this channel and you think that it should grow and be exposed to more audiences, which would help my channel tremendously. Thank you all so much for considering it. Now back to the video. Just one more quick thing. This monument did not stand here in 1775. It was built much later in 1903. So in 1775, this was just a hilltop, but fortifications were built on it during the siege. Captain Haynes' Sudbury men started their pursuit after the North Bridge. Captain Walker's Woburn men entered the battle around here. We're at the Elm Brook Hill part of Battle Road in Lincoln. Woburn is the town next to Lexington. And earlier that morning, the Woburn men actually heard the British firing on Lexington Green at dawn, and they arrived at Lexington Green early enough to see the dead and wounded militiamen. But they did not actually engage the British until around here. Major Loamy Baldwin of the Woburn militia said that he and his men made use of the terrain here. They decided to scatter and take advantage of all of the trees and stone walls that flanked the road and use them as cover from which to fire at the British column as it passed. The British took many casualties on this spot. Major Baldwin recalled that he himself got off many good shots here and that several British soldiers fell dead and wounded. Some of the British troops were buried here near this spot where they fell. Here are some papers that I pulled out of the archives to show you. These are receipts showing that Captain Aaron Haynes drew provisions for 29 men, and you'll see that it's signed by Captain Haynes and dated April 22nd, 1775. And this one shows that Captain Joshua Walker drew provisions for 162 men. This receipt is signed by him and dated April 22nd, 1775. In those first few days after Lexington and Concord, the provisions were likely just bread and meat, beef or pork. But then soon after, the provisions get more varied, and there's beef, pork, fish, peas, beans, rice, and I've even seen oatmeal, raisins, and molasses. Also in my research, I found another receipt that's a little bit different, and I wanted to show you. Captain Freeborn Moulton. Yes, his first name was Freeborn. He was a 58-year-old minute captain from Monson, Massachusetts. And his receipt shows that he drew provisions at Cambridge on April 24th, 1775, and he enumerated the men in his company. He had 2 lieutenants, a clerk, 4 sergeants, 4 corporals, 1 drummer, 1 fifer, and 40 rank and file. But on this receipt, there is a notation from the Commissary General, John Pigeon, to one of his deputies, which says, to supply the above men with a supper. I think Captain Freeborn Moulton's company probably arrived here at camp in Cambridge on April 24th, and that this would be after him and his company having received word of Lexington and Concord, mustering and then marching halfway across Massachusetts from Monson to Cambridge. My thought is that they probably arrived here at camp around supper time. As Captain Freeborn Moulton's men arrived and sat around the campfire with their bread and meat, as so many other arriving militia companies would do, it was not the end. It was just the beginning. The siege of Boston had begun. General George Washington would arrive on the scene in early July 1775 as Commander-in-Chief of the newly formed Continental Army. And he ate differently than the enlisted men, including some rather unusual menu items, as we'll see in this video, where we go on site to Washington's first headquarters during the first year of the American Revolution. Thank you all so much for being here. I'll see you in the next one.